We're live. Hello. Thank you for tuning in to this Know Your Rights training on the new COVID-19 Eviction Moratorium in Illinois, hosted by the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. My name is Joe DeCola, and I am a staff attorney at the Westside Justice Center. I practice, about half of what I practice is landlord-tenant law, representing tenants. Our presenters are from the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, Uptown People's Law Center, Legal Aid Chicago, and we're going to discuss in detail the changes to the state moratorium on residential evictions based on the governor's executive order that was issued on November 13th. So since the pandemic started, there's been a moratorium or a freeze on residential evictions. The rules changed and the moratorium got narrower on November 13th, and so we're here to explain that. This workshop is for tenants and tenant advocates alike. We are going to explain the changes to the moratorium in detail, provide some context for the ordinary eviction process, go over changes to the law such as the CARES Act and the Chicago COVID-19 ordinance. And finally, we will give information on how to contact legal aid and how you can help yourself and fill out the moratorium declaration form on the Rentervention app. So to kick things off, we're going to start with a video from Charlie Isaacs, an attorney at Uptown People's Law Center, which gives us a great introduction to the current eviction moratorium. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Charlie Isaacs. I'm a housing lawyer at Uptown People's Law Center, and I'm here to walk you through the changes to the Illinois eviction moratorium. Now, for those of you who can't stay long, I'll put it briefly. With the new moratorium, landlords are not allowed to file evictions unless you qualify for the moratorium by fulfilling 4 criteria. First, you fulfill an income requirement. Second, you make best efforts to pay rent on time. Third, you fall behind on rent due to COVID-19. And 4, you are at risk of homelessness if you were to lose your housing. If you fulfill that criteria, then what you have to do is you sign and submit a declaration form that basically says that you fulfill this criteria and you swear to it under penalty of perjury. Where do you find those forms? At these 2 websites right here. Illinois Housing Development Authority.org, IHDA.org, and Rentervention.com. Now I know that that's a lot of information that I just kind of unloaded. That's a lot of information. So if you can hang around with me, I'm going to walk you through how all this stuff works. So first, let's make sure that we're on the same page here. Remember that evictions are not singular events. It's a process. Before the actual removal of the person from the home, the landlord first has to do an eviction notice, a 5-day notice to give you 5 days to cure the problem, pay whatever you owe. After those 5 days, if you don't pay what you owe, then the landlord can do an eviction filing, file a lawsuit, an eviction action. Then the landlord has to wait to get an actual eviction order by the judge. And then and only then, not the landlord, but somebody from the office of the sheriff of Cook County can come and actually enforce the eviction. So it's a process. I think it's important to bear that in mind as we talk about this moratorium. To understand the changes, let's look at where we were before. So before, what we had was a blanket ban on evictions. For several months, starting over the summer, Governor Pritzker was renewing and extending a 30-day ban on evictions, both eviction filings and the enforcement of evictions, both of those things. The only exception were situations where the renter was deemed to be a direct threat to other people in the building or an immediate risk to security in the building. That was the only exception. Otherwise, everybody was protected from, again, both eviction filings and the enforcement of evictions. Now, that is what changed last week, November 13th, with the new eviction moratorium. Now, just like the other ones, this was extended for another 30 days. But it's narrower now. It's narrower in 3 different ways. There's 3 big changes that have been made. First, in order to be protected from an eviction filing, a renter has to qualify for the protection. Now, again, this is only for the eviction filing. The same old rule applies with enforcement. No eviction enforcement through December 12th unless you're a direct threat to the building, immediate risk to others. But with eviction filings, now you actually have to be eligible and meet these criteria. The second thing is that even when you meet those criteria, you also have to sign and submit a declaration form. The declaration form says that, like, you swear under penalty of perjury that you're telling the truth, that you fulfill this criteria, and you're protected by the moratorium. The third and final really big change within the moratorium is that if a landlord wants to file an eviction, they have to first provide you, the tenant, with a copy of the declaration form so that you have a chance to review it, sign it, and submit it so that you can be protected from that eviction filing. So I know that's a lot. It's a lot of information. Let's walk through each of those one at a time. The first one is the limiting eligibility for the moratorium. Like I said, before the moratorium, all the renters were shielded from eviction filings. But now, a renter has to qualify for that protection. So what is the eligibility? Here you go. So, like I mentioned in the very beginning of this presentation, there are 4 eligibility criteria. First, there's an income requirement, and I'll get back to that in a second. Second, you have to have been a renter that fell behind on rent due to COVID-19 because of maybe you lost a job, you lost wages, you lost hours, or your expenses went up due to the pandemic. Third, you did your best to keep up with your rental payments. You tried, maybe you did partial payments, you did your best, taking into consideration your costs for your necessities. What are necessities? Medicine, winter clothing, child care, phone and internet access, and of course food. So best efforts there. That's the third criteria. Fourth and finally, you have to be a renter where the loss of your housing would cause you to have a severe risk of becoming homeless or having to go into a shelter. So those are the 4 criteria. Let's go back to income requirement. Income requirement is a little funny. There are 3 ways that you can fulfill it. The main way is if you expect to make under $99,000 in 2020, or if you file as a couple. If you file jointly, then it would be under $198,000 in 2020. The other way is if you got a stimulus check. And the third and final way for the income requirement is if you were not required to file taxes in 2019, if you weren't required to report your income. Those are the 3 ways in which you can fulfill the income requirement. So if you are able to fulfill all of these, then you would be able to be protected from evictions, from an eviction filing. Now, it doesn't end there though. See, before in the old moratorium, you would have automatic protection from eviction filings, but that's the other really big change. Submitting a declaration form. See, now you can't just qualify. You have to actually also submit a form. Now, what is a declaration? The declaration it's a special form. It's this fancy thing where you're basically saying, hey, I meet the criteria for eviction protection, and I swear to it under oath, under penalty of perjury. So this is just like being on a witness stand. If you were on a witness stand and you lied, you would be at risk of maybe going to jail or being fined or having that held against you in court. Same thing. You don't want to mess around with this form. You don't want to lie because you could face some pretty severe consequences. The other thing I want to say about this form is that signing and submitting this form is an acknowledgement that you've fallen behind on rent, which means that it could make it easier for the landlord down the line to prove that you owe rent. So for some people, you may want to take a second to think whether or not you want to actually sign this form. I'm not trying to discourage it at all. I'm just saying that you may want to talk to a housing lawyer, but if that's not to dissuade you from signing this, especially if you're at a severe risk of an eviction and you have a high priority of holding onto your housing right now. In that case, if you qualify based on these criteria, and if you sign and submit the declaration form, then until December 12th, you will be protected from an eviction filing. So that's how that part works. You may be wondering, where do you find this declaration form? These 2 websites, ihda.org and rentervention.com. Let's take a look at these websites real quick. First, ihda.org. Remember, IHDA stands for Illinois Housing Development Authority. So I just typed this into the Google. I'm going to click right here. And look at that. Pop-up window. Look what it says. Rental relief program update, eviction moratorium update. You can immediately get information about how to do this declaration form. There's a link right here. Let's click on it. And voila, that's your declaration form right there. This just lists all the criteria I described earlier. You would sign it, put your date there, and give that to your landlord. So that's pretty easy, right? But here's another one that's really great that I like. This is Rentervention.com. All right, let's go to that. Okay, so it's asking you some questions. This is like an automated bot, and it's asking you, how can I help you? Well, we're talking about preventing eviction, right? So we're going to click here. Let me go ahead and put in a zip code. Welcome to Rentervention. I'm here to help with COVID issues. I understand you want help with preventing eviction. Is that correct? Yep. And look what it says. On November 13th, Governor Pritzker ordered landlords not to evict some tenants. Do you want to see if you're protected? So you would push yes and you would keep going. That would eventually lead you to be able to see if you would qualify based on the criteria we already talked about. And then it would populate a declaration form that you can then print out or email to your landlord. So that's how those websites work. It's pretty easy. Now, let's say, however, that you are one of the inevitably many people who either forget or don't know anything about these forms. Well, that's why there's this third really big change that comes with the new moratorium. Landlords must provide the form. So if a landlord wants to file an eviction, first they have to do that notice. But before they even do that 5-day notice, what do they have to do? They have to provide the tenant with a copy of the declaration form. This is to ensure that everybody has a chance to take advantage of the protections that come with the moratorium. This is really important because if a landlord even gives you a 5-day notice, forget about the filing. If they give you a 5-day notice without first giving you a copy of that declaration form, there's a chance that this whole thing could get thrown out in court, which is why it's really important for you to pay close attention to what your landlord is telling you and what your landlord is giving you. That leads me to some larger advice that I want to give you as we wrap up this presentation. Document everything. Keep track of everything that your landlord says to you, emails you, and gives you, and vice versa, by the way. When it comes to making your best efforts to pay, you want to keep track of everything that you do to try and make payments, all the hardships that maybe get in the way, your efforts to contact the landlord to make arrangements for a payment plan, things like that. If you sign the declaration, take a photo of the declaration form before you hand it over. If you drop it in a Dropbox or slip it under the door of your landlord, take a picture of that or even take video of that as you're doing it. Anything you can do to fully substantiate the fact that you've done your part, you've done your responsibilities to take advantage of this moratorium. That's what it means to document everything. Now, almost done. I want to remind everybody, this is a moratorium that's going to last until December 12th. We don't know what's going to happen after December 12th. Maybe they will take this moratorium and extend it for another 30 days. Or maybe they'll tinker with it. Or maybe they'll go back to the old moratorium. Or maybe they will drop the moratorium entirely. We don't know. But as soon as we do know, we will let you know. But you know this. During this period, this is how things are working. You need to sign and submit this form, and you need to be eligible. And if you don't know about it, your landlord has to give you a copy of the form before they file an eviction. If you have questions, if you need more information, if you need to talk to an attorney, I recommend going to Rentervention.com, same place where you got the declaration form. You can also get in touch with an attorney. If you have questions about the presentation that I just gave, here's my email address, charlie@uplcchicago.org. My name is Charlie Isaacs. I work on tenants' rights at the Uptown People's Law Center, and I hope this presentation was really helpful for you. So thanks so much for watching and listening, and stay safe.
Thanks, Charlie. Well, that was great, and gives you an overview and some depth about what we're about to go into in even more depth. So I'm going to hand it off to Michelle Gilbert from the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing, who's going to go through some slides about the new moratorium and the eviction process. So thanks, Michelle.
Welcome. I'm glad that you can join us and that we will be recording this for posterity to be able to share with tenants who need the information. Remember, this is legal information. If you have, we'd love to answer your questions, type them in the chat, put them in Facebook, and we'll try to answer your questions. If you have a specific legal problem, reach out to one of the providers here. We don't want to have you give confidential information over the internet. A few words about what happened before COVID, if you can remember that far back now. Landlord has to give a tenant a termination notice, a 5-day notice for rent, and has to spell out how much rent is owed. Then the landlord has to file an eviction complaint and get service of summons. The landlord has to go before a judge to get an eviction order. And the eviction order can only be enforced by the sheriff. Even if the landlord has a valid eviction order, they can't enforce it on their own. That's a lockout and it's illegal. Now, it comes to no surprise that, like the pandemic itself, that there's a disproportionate racial impact when we look at evictions. Our organization studies evictions, looking at all of the data, not just our own cases, and we can see that those community areas in Chicago that are majority Black are where we find the highest incident of eviction. This especially affects Black women and women living with children. And it's not just about economics. We know that it is also about race, because even when studies control for economic status, landlords are more likely to evict Black tenants than white tenants. If you're interested in that topic, you can get more information from these excellent books, Evicted, The Color of Law, and Family Properties, that's about the real estate market right here in Chicago. Here are two. The Scarlet E is a podcast, and the Color of Law is a video. A lot more information out there about evictions. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the changes that we've seen in the law since COVID began. I'm going to go through quickly here because we've all just seen Charlie's great video. There was a moratorium in place from April 23rd until November 13 that no evictions could be filed. But that changed and required that people fill out a declaration. And as Charlie explained, the declaration includes these 4 elements. The change in the moratorium means that we went from a place where nearly all evictions were prohibited. So all of those in blue could not be filed. Only the small category in the pink, health and safety violations. We had a long discussion about what color that was, pink, red. Only those evictions could be filed. And now we're in a situation where more evictions can be filed, and the only ones that are prohibited are those where the landlord has received the COVID-related declaration. Now, it could have gone differently. We could have created a second exception for those people, and I don't know any of them, and I wouldn't represent any of them, but those people who had all the same money coming in but still refused to pay their rent. But that's not what happened, even though that was the category of people that the real estate industry was complaining about. Again, we went to this place where most evictions can be filed, and only if the landlord gets the declaration is the eviction prohibited. And this is hugely important and why I'm trying to get this word out. Now, we're really troubled for a couple of situations. There are evictions that aren't related to non-payment, like your lease is ended. I recommend that if you're in that situation, even if your rent is relatively paid up, to still give the landlord a declaration. But the other category of cases that really worries me is the people who are covered by the moratorium. All 5 things are true, but they don't know to give the landlord the declaration. And that's why we're trying to do as much community education as we can. A couple of other things, the executive order does still allow evictions against people who pose a health and safety threat. I believe I deleted the slide. As Charlie pointed out, there are some downsides to signing a declaration. If you have any questions, contact one of the legal aid organizations represented in this training. Okay. Do we have any questions that we want to go to now, or shall we move on to another area of law?
The one question that came through was, is the declaration or the website available in Spanish? I know that on ida.org, ihda.org, you can find the declaration in Spanish. Rentervention, I know that they're working on it. I can't speak to that.
We do have the declaration in Spanish, so if someone needs it, we can get it to you. But it won't come off of Rentervention.com in Spanish at this point.
Thanks.
And I understand that IDA is translating it into other languages as well, but those are not available yet. Any other questions?
Nothing yet. So,
all right, let's
so
go
thanks,
on
Michelle.
to a couple of other areas of law. And for that, I'm going to hand over the baton to my colleague, Brian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian. I work at Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. So I'm going to start with the CARES Act. If you recall, that's the big federal bill that was passed over the summer. That's where the stimulus checks came from. But there was also a big eviction moratorium related to that act that has since passed. It stopped being in effect back in July. But there's still 2 important parts of that. That's some property owners that had federally backed mortgages that couldn't evict during that period still got an extension, or forbearance, so therefore they still can't file evictions under that act, even though it's generally passed. And of course, the other prohibition is excessive late fees or excessive penalties. So any landlord that has a federally backed mortgage can't charge crazy late fees or penalties. The next thing that's kind of in place is court orders. So these are orders coming out of the Cook County courts that enforce, that do evictions and stuff. So back in March 13th, the county courts were closed, and they didn't start, pending cases didn't start back up till July. So the sheriff are not serving summons since March 13th. So we learned about that. That's when the sheriff comes and summons you to court. They're not doing that generally unless you're under those 2 exceptions, which is health and safety to other tenants or severe risk to property. But generally, the sheriff is not coming out and serving summons. Now, that means that some people might not know there's an eviction filed against them in the court system. So what that means is the landlord filed an eviction, but because the sheriff isn't coming out, you might not know. The way you find out that information is you go to the Cook County Circuit Court website, and you go to that middle link there, look up case info, and that will bring you to this site here, and you can select civil under the division and then put your name there, and it'll pull up it'll pull up a case. If there's a case filed under your name, it'll be there. And if not, it won't be there. So if you see that means there is an eviction on your filed against you, and you should contact a lawyer immediately, because it's really important to deal with that. You have the right to defend that eviction. You probably have some defenses, of course, the moratorium, and you also want to get that sealed, which means try and get that eviction off your record so future landlords can't see it. Another order that came in just today from the Chief Judge Evans, they ordered that the sheriff won't be serving any residential evictions due to the ongoing rising cases of COVID. So it seems that the sheriff will continue to just not be serving any or enforcing any evictions right now. That could change. That was just from today. So stay tuned on that. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about, well, not the last thing, but another important thing is the City of Chicago COVID ordinance. This kind of piggybacks on some of the other moratorium. It's the goal of this ordinance is to get landlords to negotiate with tenants instead of going to the court and filing evictions. So it kind of forces the landlord to talk to the tenant and try and work out a payment plan as opposed to going to the court and filing an eviction. So what it does, so we learned about 5-day notices earlier, but now when a landlord issues a 5-day notice, they now have to give an extra 7 days for the tenant to come back and say in writing that their income has decreased to COVID and they want to try and make reasonable payments and work out a payment plan. Now, we have this new declaration that they have to give to the tenant as well. So you've got this combo of the landlord having to give you this declaration where you, if you've lost your job or lost income, you can fill it out and give it to them. And now you have this 7-day period where the landlord has to kind of try to work out something with you to enter into a payment plan. So maybe you can make partial payments or for like delay payment or something like that, whatever you can work out in writing. This ordinance also prevents the landlord from asking about your assets or personal property, and they can't reject emergency rental assistance, and of course they can't charge unreasonable interest or late fees. But what this ordinance doesn't prevent is evictions due to serious lease violations like health and safety risk to other tenants or severe risk to property damage. Most importantly, it does not cancel rent. So the tenant's still responsible for rent, but you can it helps try to work that out. And also they can still charge late fees and penalties, just not unreasonable ones. Okay, lastly is the CDC moratorium. So you may have heard of this. This is the national moratorium put out by the Center of Disease Control. And we think that the Illinois moratorium is similar. So landlords in Cook County and Chicago and Illinois are going to, they're going to be more familiar with the Illinois moratorium than the CDC one. So we encourage tenants to fill out the Illinois moratorium as opposed to the CDC declaration, even though the language kind of tracks a little bit. We just think it'll be better for Illinois tenants to focus on the Illinois moratorium as opposed to the CDC moratorium. But remember, all these are changing, as Charlie said and as Michelle mentioned. These laws are changing, and we know right now that the current moratorium will be here until December 13th, but after that, we're not sure. So we're going to try our best to keep track and keep you all informed as we become informed as well. And I think that's it for me. I'm going to.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, that was great. Okay, I think Gerald Polanco from Uptown People's Law Center is going to take us through some more information about different relief programs. And yeah, so take it away, Gerald.
Hello, yes, as Joe said, my name is Gerald Polanco from Uptown People's Law Center. So we just talked a little bit about different forms of relief and what's happening, and I will wrap it up by sort of talking about, the landscape of landlord tenant. So what we as attorneys and advocates think is that we need a real estate industry bailout. So the emergency rental assistance actually goes to the landlords. The eviction moratorium discussion should center on housing provider bailouts, right? So the pressure on the tenants to pay the rent is backed by the fact that landlords have to make their mortgages. Next. Thank you. So what are we seeing instead, right? So we have this moratorium, and even now with the change in the executive order, we're seeing we can't have these orders, these evictions or these orders of possession enforced. So what we're seeing a lot is illegal lockouts that can happen often by threatening behavior from the landlord. It can happen by refusals to make repairs, sometimes by truly just kicking the person out of the apartment entirely. We are seeing an uptick in health and safety evictions. So that's one of the exceptions in the governor's moratorium that we see. And so we're seeing that health and safety is being interpreted a little bit more broadly than we would like it to be interpreted. And so here are some examples that provided, sort of the cursing or having a dog, police being called for a party. So what we're thinking here is, or what you're seeing here, those are often examples of what's called a lease violation, which would have been covered in a different way under a general eviction court process. And then these sham real estate agents. So it's where a tenant has peacefully entered into a unit with an agent who appears to have the authority to actually allow them to enter into the unit. And then landlords are saying, no, 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 I don't know who this person is. They were lying to you. You really, I have no association with them. You have no right to be into this unit, so we're gonna kick you out. And so that's very, very confusing for tenants right now. So even though we've been talking about how landlords are trying to get you out and we're talking about evictions, in truth, we find that a lot of landlords don't want to file an eviction, right? Because at the end of the day, they want to get paid. Filing an eviction is a bit of a hassle. They have to pay for filing fees, pay attorney's fees. They have to go to court or attorney's office. And then they have to empty out the unit and they have to end up re-renting it to someone. So there might be a lag in the moment in which they decide to begin the process of giving you a notice to when they can actually have you vacate the unit and then place someone else in that unit. And that's money and that's time. That's a headache for them. And at the end of the day, what they really want is money, right? So an agreement in Illinois law allows for a landlord to make a partial payment of rent and still file an eviction, unless the landlord has agreed in writing to delay an eviction, right? So a lot of times we'll see tenants that will say, you know, I paid something, they said it was fine, and then they filed an eviction. And in truth, unless you have something in writing where the landlord says, I will take partial payment or begin a payment plan, and if you do that, then I won't file an eviction or I won't pursue an eviction against you. That's the only way you can truly protect yourself, because the landlord can take rent and be an eviction process. So here's an example of what a possible simple agreement might look like. And as you can see the logo at the bottom, ILEO is Illinois Legal Aid Online. So later on, we talk a little bit about what ILEO is, but it's a really great resource for everyone. I, as an attorney, even use it myself. So emergency assistance funds are available, and they have been for the last several weeks to months. And they can be used as payments in the repayment agreement. The Chicago ordinance prevents landlords from refusing to accept third-party funds. Refusal to accept these funds is a source of income discrimination, which is illegal throughout Cook County, right? So when we think back to the Chicago ordinance, we're thinking back to that ordinance that passed over the summer that was discussed earlier by Brian. So when you call for legal assistance, and so one way to do it, so you can use resources like ILEO. ILEO is an online platform for information and as well as forms that you can use, easy forms, and they're in English and Spanish. There's Rentervention, which allows you to answer questions online, and we're going to discuss a little bit more about Rentervention towards the end. You can also call legal aid programs to consult with legal aid staff. And there are housing subsidies are also complicated by additional federal laws and regulations. So tenants with housing subsidies may want to call soon. Eviction court deadlines are very short. So calling legal aid right away or as soon as you get a court summons, possibly sooner, honestly, is the best way to go. You don't want to sit on this. You want to move ahead quickly. So a lot of times you'll get mailings or you'll see posters for things that are for private attorneys. And so don't be fooled. A lot of times you can get as good, if not better, service by a free attorney, by a legal aid attorney, and you can get it for free. So how to contact it. So there are different ways, and they're going to ask you a lot of questions. So, and different legal aids will take different kinds of cases. So you want to make sure that when you call, so the legal aid community here has a general number you can call for advice and referral to the appropriate legal aid program. So it's called CARPL, Coordinated Advice and Referral Program for Legal Services. So the number and the contact information are provided in the following slides. And that will give you a more directed way to get to the right legal aid, so you're not floundering around calling different places and wasting your time. Something to keep in mind when you're calling for legal aids is usually it's good to call early, as intake lines can get full and closed. If you have a choice, don't hold on the line, request a callback, and remember to answer when we call. So don't screen the calls, otherwise you'll miss our callback. And that when I say early, I do want to emphasize early. So if the office closes at 8:30, you should have your number dialed by before then and call. We're not joking that sometimes we get a lot of calls and the intake can close. So tips for the call: have your documents together when you make the call. Attorneys usually need to look at documents as a way, so think of a way that you can get it to us, either through photos or emails. And we have to ask background questions often for eligibility and other reasons. And so sometimes they may seem unrelated to your legal problem, but it's a requirement by the person who's doing the intake, the initial intake with you, okay? Social worker or friend can help you sign up, but we need to talk to the actual person with the legal problem to assess it. And try to get the full name of the landlord or other parties involved in the case. But don't delay or forget to call if you do not have this information. Deadlines are really short in eviction court. Next slide. So here what we're talking about is evictions, foreclosures, and unresolved debt issues. So you want to call here the early resolution program to speak with a lawyer and get connected to other resources. This program is available to all residents of Cook County free of charge. You don't need to have a case in court to get help. So you can call that number or apply online, Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt. Next slide. So Leo, sort of as I was discussing before, right? It has lots of articles, information, forms, videos in English, Spanish, and Polish. And they're easy to read on your phone. They're app friendly, and they have all types of issues, not just housing. So Uptown People's Law Center is the office that I come from, and Charlie, who is at the top of the video. So feel free to contact us either at that phone number or, feel free to contact us at that phone number and we can provide an intake. If someone doesn't take your call, please leave a voicemail and we'll call you back. So Illinois Legal Aid Online, Legal Aid Chicago serves people free who qualify. They do intakes available in most languages, and everything that's discussed during the intake is confidential. So feel free to call that number or go to Illinois Legal Aid Online for you to be able to do an intake. And Lawyers Community for Better Housing is the host for this. So here they help people, they get people free attorneys who provide advice, negotiate with your landlord, or even represent you in court if you are in Chicago and at risk of being evicted because of COVID-19. So feel free to call that number down there at the bottom or visit Rentervention 24 hours a day. Rentervention.com. So as you can see here, you can either text hi to that number or you can go online to rentervention.com.
Thanks, Gerald. Yeah, Morgan, you're all ready. So our final piece of the program before we have a couple questions we can resolve at the end. If anybody is live, please send Facebook comment questions and we will address them. But now Morgan Schumann is going to talk about how to use Rentervention, how to physically get this declaration form, what you should do with it, like the actual, how do you get this to your landlord problem. So thanks a lot, Morgan.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody's able to see my screen okay. So I want to just walk you through what it would look like to walk through chatting with Rennie through rentervention.com. So it's real easy. It's just a website, rentervention.com. And when you hop on there, you'll be able to see a chat bot just kind of pop up right in the middle, and you can interact with Rennie, and he can help with a lot of different issues. So in this case, after watching this presentation, you might be worried about facing eviction, and you might want to know how you can get a copy of that declaration that you could give your landlord, or you might have other questions about what you can do if your landlord is harassing you, or if you've got problems with the conditions in your apartment or anything like that. So when you come on to Rentervention, you'll be able to kind of check off what it is that the issues are that you're experiencing. And I've got a sample conversation here so you can see what that might look like. And Rennie's just going to confirm what you're looking for, and then it's going to jump right in if you're looking to try to prevent eviction to see whether you could qualify for that protection from the governor's eviction moratorium. So here I just confirmed that that was the case, and then it's going to ask me a few eligibility questions. So let's see, I'm going to say, yes, I'm interested in seeing if I'm eligible. And then now it wants to know my income. So that, remember, that's one of the 4 different things that you have to confirm, is that you make less than a certain amount of money in order to qualify. So we'll confirm that. Then the next thing would be verifying why you fell behind on rent. So maybe you lost some income, you could check that off. And then it's going to ask you to swear that you have made your best efforts to continue making rent payments. And if you say that that's true, then it'll move you on. And if evicted from your home, you have to affirm that you would become homeless or have to move in with other people because you wouldn't have any other options for where to stay. So if you agree to that as well, then it's, oh, we're almost done. There's one more, sorry. So you understand that you have to continue to pay rent in the long run, and that rent is still owed to your landlord. So you'll agree there. Your landlord's going to keep charging, and they can charge you fees. And then once you basically walk through all of this and you understand that if you lie on this agreement, that you could face jail time or fines or penalties because the declaration is under penalty of perjury. So we want to make sure that you really understand that. It's going to then allow you to generate a letter. So you'll be able to plop in your name, email address, and then your landlord's information, and it'll give you the option to be allowed for us to be able to contact you as well. So it's real simple. I know it seems like a lot of questions walking through it, but you can do it in about 2 minutes. And once you submit that, you're going to get an email from Rentervention, and it's going to look something like this. So Illinois Declaration Follow-up, and it will have a PDF attached as well as a link to a Google Doc if you want to be able to open the file and edit it there. You'll also get an email from Sign Now, which is an e-signature platform. So if you don't have a printer at home and you need a way to get your signature onto this declaration before giving it to your landlord, you can go through the steps for Sign Now in order to actually e-sign the document. And then a copy will be emailed to you with your electronic signature on it. And you can send that document with your e-signature to your landlord. So I just want to make sure that you know that if you do walk through Rentervention to get a declaration, it is still on you to get that declaration to your landlord. Rentervention does not do that for you, but it will get you the declaration in your email, and it will have it filled out with the information you give. So here I filled out the name of my landlord, and it puts in my name at the end as a signature line. So you can go through Rentervention, you can get a letter that explains the declaration to your landlord, and then a copy of the declaration itself. So I hope that's helpful. Any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Morgan. And I would note that you can email the declaration to your landlord. So if you don't have a printer, you can sign it online, and Rentervention will give you the file. And then if you have your landlord's email, you can email it to them. If you're doing it on your phone, you can text them the declaration. So you really don't need to go expose yourself to COVID, make a trip to a FedEx, Kinko's, or something. You can do this all online if you've got a phone or can access one. So that's the end of our programming, except for Q&A. So I'll just throw these out, and we have an august group of housing attorneys on the line to answer these. So is the declaration form only for people at risk of eviction or anyone who is impacted by COVID-19. Should anybody who is impacted by COVID-19 give the form? Yeah. So I'll give my take on this first. I think you want to be sure that you're eligible for it. So the first thing is to go through the requirements. So even if you were impacted by COVID-19 in some way, you're still signing a declaration that's where, like Charlie said in his video, it's like you're testifying on the stand. So if you're going to make more than $99,000 or any of those other criteria, then you don't want to sign something that's going to be false. So it's hard to give a blanket recommendation to people why that you should just sign this thing as a preventative measure, which is why the previous moratorium was much better, because it automatically applied to residential evictions. You didn't need to take an affirmative act like filling out a declaration, and it applied to all residential evictions. So that's my take. If anybody else wants to weigh in on whether about filling out the form.
I would just say that some people are at risk of eviction for other than non-payment reasons. Like if your lease is expired and you haven't been able to move, but your rent is still paid up. For those folks, they are protected by the eviction moratorium at this point. We're hoping that will change. I think it's still good to have a discussion with the landlord. I would say you wouldn't necessarily want to give the declaration, but again, this is all just general legal information. And if somebody has a specific situation, all of us would be very happy to go through the facts. Call Carpels, call the new Cook County line, go to Rentervention, or call any of the legal aid organizations represented here, and we can advise you on the specific facts.
Michelle, you made me think of one other thing, which is that even if you're not so the new moratorium defines a covered person as people covered by it who can't be evicted as someone who fills out this declaration. But the moratorium also continues halting the enforcement of eviction orders. So you heard Charlie in his video and then Michelle both say that only the sheriff, and if you're not in Cook County, still the sheriff of the county that you live in can enforce eviction orders. So there's a gap then where even under the new moratorium, if you're not covered, meaning you can't fill out the declaration, still your landlord can't get an enforceable eviction order right now unless they're arguing the health and safety provision. But right now, if you're in Cook County, Chief Judge Evans says that even those orders aren't being enforced. So suffice it to say, you should talk to a housing attorney, but the fact that you're not covered in terms of being eligible for filling out the declaration doesn't mean your landlord will be able to get an eviction order. So the new moratorium might still give you, it affects that bargaining. So when you're trying to enter into a payment plan and sort of persuade your landlord not to file an eviction and not to go to court, one good argument is that, well, if you go to court, you're not going to get an enforceable eviction order yet anyway. So you should enter into a partial payment plan with me. And that's my advice. Okay. If someone is in the eviction process because of a loose interpretation of health and safety, how can they get support around that? Contact legal aid.
Yeah, we are taking those eviction cases. We're filing motions to dismiss because they don't meet the health and safety standard. I don't want to go into anyone's specific facts, but if you have an eviction case pending against you, call one of these legal aid programs. And if it's about a health and safety violation, we could argue that it's not that kind of case and that the case should be dismissed.
Are people impacted by COVID-19 able to use a security deposit to cover a month's rent?
That's actually covered by the Chicago ordinance. It's one of the ways that you can work out a repayment agreement. It seemed like a better idea in June and July than it is now. Who knew that we would be in this situation for so long? The other thing that I want to say about working out a repayment agreement is that, as Gerald said, there are emergency rental assistance programs available. Lawyers Committee for Better Housing actually administers some of that money. If you need rental assistance, you can contact us either through Rentervention, as Morgan was showing the different things that you can click on. You can click, I need, I need money for housing. You can call 311, the city non-emergency number. If you call Lawyers Committee, we can help you get rental assistance and we can help you negotiate with your landlord. I talk to landlords and landlords' attorneys and trying to work on these policies, and landlords are telling me that tenants aren't contacting them. And that makes complete sense to me. Like when I was a kid, sometimes we didn't have money, and I knew one day the bills were coming in the mail. I know that if you can't pay a bill, it's easier to throw it away than to try to deal with it. You know, it's easier to just hope that it gets better. And, you know, maybe you don't want to call your landlord and say, I can't pay my rent. Call a lawyer. We can give you some information to help empower you to make that conversation, or we can call your landlord for you, or one of our social workers can call your landlord for you. And it makes it a whole lot easier to make that call when we have emergency rental assistance to help pay that debt. So, you know, there's no reason not to call legal aid right now to try to get help in this situation.
Thanks, Michelle. There's a question. Does the declaration say something about COVID-specific hardships? Yes, it does tie your inability to pay rent directly to COVID-19, which is one reason it's narrow, because there's people fall behind on rent or encounter, you know, catastrophic illness or unexpected expenses all the time, not necessarily covered. It does use the words directly related to COVID-19.
I think it's kind of interesting, like what is related to COVID-19 at this point?
Everything.
Like everything. Yeah. So maybe you lost your job, but you know, you can't say it's specific because you know, like obviously you're at a restaurant, restaurants are closed, you can say that's impacted by COVID. Maybe it's not that obvious. You know, or maybe like you have your job, but you get half your income from child support, and your job has been fine. You can work from home or something, but you're supposed to be getting child support, and that's been cut. I would say if your income has decreased in 2020, it's related to COVID. So if you're not able to pay your rent and your income has gone down, I would not worry about exactly how to figure out that it's related to COVID, because it is. Everything is. You know, I would say that do the declaration if your income has gone down.
And I'll add,
had medical expenses, or if say your job wasn't eliminated, but you have to work part-time now because your kids are doing remote schooling, or you know, you had to help take care of somebody, so your income was down.
Morgan, you were going to add?
I was going to add exactly where Michelle went, is that not only is income something that might have decreased, but your expenses could have increased if you were diagnosed with COVID or had to seek medical treatment, or if you had to pay more in order to get childcare during this time or anything like that. Any of those non-discretionary changes in terms of your expenses could also be a financial hardship related to COVID.
Thanks. Those are great points. And so, okay, so we have a question. What's the notice requirement for the health and safety provision? Yeah. I'm not sure if this is a question from the group or from Charlie, but either way, I would say it's probably a 10-day because so in general terms, a 5-day notice is for non-payment of rent or you're behind on rent. The 10-day notice is for some kind of lease violation. The 30-day is for a non-renewal of a lease or ending a month to month or something like that. So it would stand to reason then that if your landlord is evicting you based on the health and safety exemption to the eviction moratorium, that you would need to be served with a 10-day notice. And also remember that the declaration form itself has to be given to you along with that notice. Those are all the questions we have right now. I would say one thing we didn't talk about a lot. So we had one of the questions, if someone is in the eviction process because of a loose interpretation of health and safety. You know, over the last few months, I've been hearing a lot more about building conditions issues, which are just always a factor in the eviction world. And so we didn't talk a lot about that here, but those are really serious problems. And so the whole story isn't necessarily you and falling behind on rent. Your landlord has to follow the building code, has to follow common law rules for renting you a habitable place to live. And so not every apartment meets that standard. And so if you are having issues with bugs, with the heat, with whatever, that is also relevant to this world of whether or not you can make rent. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. So that's pretty much the end. We don't have any more questions. I think, yeah, Michelle, would you mind showing the slides that have all the legal aid info just at the end, just as we wrap up? And so I'll just say thanks everyone for presenting and for tuning in. Okay, great. So this is the Cook County legal aid line, and then Michelle, I guess, could just like click through because this will be recorded so people can pause on the different slides. But yeah. All right, I'm gonna stop talking. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you all have a good night.